There is a 2-week window every June that determines what your perennial garden looks like for the rest of the entire summer. Once the first real heat wave arrives in early July, that window has closed for the year. Beds that get the right work done before July arrives look magnificent through August. Beds that miss this window start declining by the second week of July, develop the diseases that no spray can fully reverse, and stop blooming at the exact moment summer is supposed to peak. 9 tasks, one specific perennial behind each one. 40 years in my own trial garden tell me that almost every gardener I have ever met handles number 1 wrong every single June, and pays for it with a second bloom they never get. Today I want to walk you through all 9. If you are new here, welcome to the Gardening Grandma. Hit that subscribe button right now. Let us get to work. Task 9. Refresh every perennial bed edge with a half-moon edger before the grass takes the boundary back entirely. The half-moon edger is a tool that few gardeners under 50 have ever held. A flat half-circle of steel on a long wooden handle used to cut a clean vertical face at the boundary between lawn and garden bed. One pass of the edger drops the soil 2 to 3 inches deeper than the lawn line and resets the bed boundary completely. Every grass root that spent April and May creeping under the mulch into the bed gets cleanly severed. The result is immediate and dramatic. The mulch line snaps back to sharp. The whole bed reads as 10 years younger from across the yard. Here is what most gardeners never discover until the damage is already done. By June, lawn grass has typically pushed 12 to 18 inches into a shade bed where the edge was crisp at the start of April. A single afternoon with the half-moon edger pulls that line back to its original shape, severs the invasion, and creates the clean, dark frame that makes every plant inside the bed stand out. The hostas, the heuchera, the bleeding heart. Every plant looks better than it did the day before, with not a single plant change made. Find a half-moon edger at any hardware store or rental yard. Cut along the bed edge in early morning while the soil is still slightly damp. The cut goes cleaner through damp soil than through dry. 40 years in the trial garden, the half-moon edge is the single most dramatic transformation a perennial bed gets in one Saturday morning. Task 8. Switch to deep morning watering before July arrives. The most damaging watering habit in perennial gardening is daily light watering with the hose. It feels responsible. You are out there every day doing the work. But light surface watering only wets the top inch or so of soil. Established perennial roots sit anywhere from 6 inches to 18 inches below the surface. The shallow water never reaches them. Worse, the plant responds to chronic shallow watering by sending more roots up toward the wet zone at the surface, exactly where they are most exposed to heat and drought stress when July arrives. Here is what most gardeners never discover until the damage is already done. A garden phlox bed watered in the evening with a sprinkler that wets the foliage stays damp through the night. Powdery mildew spores establish within 3 nights. By mid-July, the lower leaves are gray-white and the plant is in visible decline. The same phlox bed watered at the soil line in early morning, slow and deep twice a week, comes through August completely clean. My rule now is simple. 1 inch of water per week broken into 2 long soaks rather than 7 quick passes. Apply slowly enough that water penetrates rather than runs off. A useful test: set an empty tin can in your sprinkler's spray zone. When the can is full, the bed has received its inch. Always water in the early morning. Foliage wet in the morning dries in the heat of the day. Foliage wet at dusk stays wet through the night, and that is exactly where powdery mildew and black spot establish. Task 7. Mulch every perennial bed to 4 inches before the first major heat wave of July. And if you have access to compost, work an inch of that under the mulch first. Mulch in a perennial bed is not decorative. It is the most effective working layer between your plants and July heat. A water holding cap, a soil temperature buffer, and a weed barrier in one move. 4 inches of shredded bark or wood chip mulch cuts surface evaporation by roughly 2/3. The deep weekly watering you do goes twice as far under that mulch layer, and the soil holds steady moisture between sessions, instead of swinging from wet to bone dry. The compost is the step most gardeners skip. 1 inch of finished compost worked into the soil surface around each perennial clump before the mulch goes down replaces every reason to buy a bag of synthetic fertilizer for the rest of the summer. Here is what most gardeners never discover until the damage is already done. Heuchera roots sit in the top 2 to 4 inches of soil. In a bed without mulch, the surface temperature on a 95-degree July afternoon can hit 120 degrees. The root zone cooks. The plant declines or dies. The same Heuchera in a bed with 1 inch of compost under 4 inches of mulch sits in soil that stays in the 70s even on the hottest day. My rule now is simple. Keep mulch pulled back 2 inches from the actual stem of every plant. Mulch piled against the crown invites rot and pest damage. The protection goes around the plant, not against it. Task 6. Chelsea chop your fall blooming perennials right now to get shorter, stronger, more abundant flowers in September, and no need to stake any of them later. The Chelsea chop is a technique borrowed from English garden tradition. Pinch back the soft new growth on fall blooming perennials by 1/3 to 1/2 during the last week of May or the first 3 weeks of June. The plant responds by branching at every cut point, producing more flower buds along a shorter, more compact, self-supporting stem. The September bloom is denser, more colorful, and it never flops in a heavy autumn rain. The textbook example is tall sedum. Without the Chelsea chop, the plant reaches 3 feet tall by September. The heavy flower heads splay outward, the center opens like a broken umbrella, and you spend October propping up flopped stems with bamboo stakes. Chelsea chopped in mid-June, the same plant stays at 24 to 30 inches, branches densely from every cut point, holds vertical through November, and produces nearly twice as many flower clusters. My rule now is simple. Cut back the soft top growth by 1/3 for a moderate effect, 1/2 for stronger compaction. Use bypass pruners and cut just above a healthy leaf node. The plant looks bare for 10 to 14 days. By mid-July, the regrowth is denser than the original. By September, every cut node produces more flowers than the uncut plant would have. Other fall bloomers that respond well: asters, helenium, tall garden phlox where height is a problem, and Joe Pye weed. We are halfway through the 9 tasks. Before we continue, drop your state and your growing zone in the comments below. Every one of these tasks applies a little differently depending on where you are in the country and how far along your perennials are right now. And if this is helping you, hit subscribe. I put out gardening advice every single week. Task 5. Walk every perennial bed this week with a careful eye for pests and early disease before the heat of July multiplies both. The reason June scouting matters is straightforward biology. Warm temperatures accelerate the reproduction cycle of every pest and fungal pathogen already present in the garden. An aphid colony of 20 insects on a catmint leaf this week becomes hundreds per leaf within 10 days of summer heat. A small patch of powdery mildew at the base of a phlox stem in June covers the whole plant by mid-July. Caught in June, every problem is small, local, and reversible, with one short intervention. Caught in July, every problem is widespread and hard to roll back. Here is what most gardeners never discover until the damage is already done. Flip a catmint leaf this week. If you count fewer than 20 aphids per leaf, a strong blast of water from the hose, repeated 3 days in a row, clears them entirely. Wait 2 weeks and you have a sticky leaf surface with ants farming the colony. The catmint stops blooming and you are reaching for a chemical intervention you did not need. My rule now is simple. Walk every perennial bed in early morning this week. Flip leaves over and look at the undersides. Aphids, spider mite webbing, and fungal spores all establish on leaf undersides first before anything is visible from above. Check the soil line at the base of every stem for ragged holes with no visible insect during the day. Slugs feed at night and retreat to mulch by dawn. Catch the problem at the leaf level in June and you manage it in days. Wait until July and you are managing it for the rest of the summer. Task 4. Divide every perennial clump that has stopped blooming as vigorously as it used to. A perennial that has been crowding itself for several seasons stops putting on a real bloom. Once the root mass packs into the available soil tightly enough, the older crown in the center of the clump runs out of nutrient access and begins dying back while the plant pushes whatever vigor it has left out to the younger outer ring. Flower production drops. Most gardeners only notice this when their coneflower or daylily clump produces visibly fewer blooms than the year before, by which point the clump has been overcrowded for 2 summers already. The textbook example is the Stelladoro daylily. A 3-year-old clump that started as a single nursery pot is now 8 to 10 distinct crowns wedged together. Dig the whole clump, tease it apart at the natural crown divisions, and you get 8 to 10 free plants from one clump, 8 to 10 times the original nursery price in one morning of work. My rule now is simple. Water the clump deeply the day before dividing. A well-hydrated plant handles division stress dramatically better than a dry one. Dig the entire clump. Lift it cleanly. Each viable division needs at minimum 1 healthy crown with active root mass attached. Replant immediately, water deeply, and mulch to retain moisture. Expect some wilting in the first 3 to 5 days. Active new growth within 2 to 3 weeks confirms a successful division. Perennials that benefit from June division: daylilies, hostas, coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, and catmint. A single Saturday morning of dividing across a mature perennial garden routinely produces what would cost you $200 at the garden center. Task 3. Stake every tall perennial in your garden now, before the first heavy thunderstorm puts them all on the ground. The peony is the textbook case. The plant blooms in early June with heads the size of grapefruits. The first heavy rain after bloom, and June rains are dependable, will put every peony stem on the ground in a tangle you cannot lift back up without breaking. The cage you needed to install in May is the cage you need today. Here is what most gardeners never discover until the damage is already done. The original American peony beds from decades past had wire grow-through hoops installed every spring when the foliage was 6 inches tall. The hoop sits over the emerging plant and the foliage grows up through the gridded support. The bloom that follows holds vertical regardless of what June throws at it. Without the hoop installed early, the plant outgrows the ability to be supported by anything you can install after the fact. My rule now is simple. Install grow-through cages or hoops as soon as the foliage is up. Early May is ideal, but install them today if you have not. The cage prevents further damage on the second wave of bloom and supports the foliage for the rest of the season. Same protocol for delphiniums. Tall stakes with garden twine in a figure-8 tie. Garden phlox needs no individual staking if planted in a dense block where stems support each other. Stake now. Once a plant is on the ground, the season is over for that plant. Task 2. Cut back specific perennials immediately after their first flush of bloom and force a second bloom most gardeners never get. Several perennials that most gardeners assume are one-flush performers actually produce a full second bloom when cut back hard immediately after their first flush ends. The technique looks brutal. It goes against every instinct. It works consistently. The clearest example is salvia. By mid-June, the flower spikes are spent and the plant looks ragged. Cut the entire spent flower mass back by 2/3 the moment the last spike is finished. The plant looks bare for 10 to 14 days. A complete second flush of spikes arrives 4 to 6 weeks later. The second bloom is often heavier than the first. Here is what most gardeners never discover until the damage is already done. The key is the timing. Cut immediately after the last bloom finishes, not when you get around to it, not when the plant looks bad enough to motivate you. The plant's energy redirects fastest when the cut is fresh. Wait a week and the window for a strong second flush begins to close. My rule now is simple. The moment the last flower on a plant finishes, that plant gets cut back. No delay. Other reliable reboomers to cut back now: catmint, Shear the entire plant back by half. It comes back fuller than the first flush. Hardy geranium, shear hard after first bloom for fresh foliage plus a partial second bloom. Coreopsis, shear the spent bloom mat back by 1/3 for an extended second flush that carries through September. Task 1. The task almost every gardener does wrong every single June and pays for it with a second bloom they never get. The instinct most gardeners follow is to pinch off the dead-looking flower head between thumb and finger and toss it aside. The bed looks tidier for an afternoon. The plant has not actually been deadheaded in any way that encourages new blooms. It has simply been tidied. The technique that triggers a second flush works on a completely different principle. Find the next pair of healthy leaves down the stem from the spent bloom, usually 2 to 4 inches below. Cut the stem at that exact point with garden snips. The plant reads that cut as a signal to push the lateral buds at that node into active bloom production. New flowers develop in 4 to 6 weeks. Here is what most gardeners never discover until the damage is already done. The cone flower is the clearest example. Most gardeners snap off the spent bloom at the neck of the flower and consider it done. Trim that same spent bloom stem all the way down to the next pair of leaves below, and the plant produces a second flush of smaller but vivid blooms by late July. The same principle works for black-eyed Susan, garden phlox, and most repeat-blooming perennials. My rule now is simple. Always cut to the next healthy leaf node, never at the bloom itself. The cut at the node is what triggers the response. The snap at the neck does nothing but remove the dead flower. One is deadheading, the other is just tidying. There is a significant difference between the two. 9 tasks, 1 calendar window. Miss any of them and July punishes the bed. Hit all of them and your perennial garden carries the rest of the summer without you having to chase it. Refresh the edge. Switch to deep morning water. Compost and mulch. Chelsea chop the fall bloomers. Scout early for pests. Divide for the free plants. Stake before the storm. Cut back for the second bloom. And deadhead correctly, all the way down to the next healthy leaf node. If today's video helped, subscribe now and share it with one gardener who is heading into July without their garden ready. They will thank you for it. Until next time, happy gardening. Take care of yourselves and take care of those beautiful gardens of yours.